The worst prison is the one with invisible walls. You don't see the bars, you don't feel the chains, but you feel that you can't breathe. You can't move. You can't be yourself. And the scariest part? The key to this prison is in your hands, but you don't even know it. Hello. Today we'll talk about something that is often met with silence. About violence that leaves no marks on the body, but destroys the soul from within. About words that become weapons. About glances that kill confidence. About silence that suffocates more powerfully than hands around your throat. We'll talk about emotional abuse, not because this topic is pleasant, but because silence makes us complicit, and because recognizing the enemy gives us a chance to win. The invisible wound. What happens when someone is physically beaten? It's simple. Pain, bruises, possibly fractures. The evidence of violence is obvious, visible. It can be photographed, documented, shown in court. Now another situation. You've ruined everything, as usual. No one else would put up with you. How many times do I have to repeat myself? Do you even have a brain? Don't be so dramatic, I'm just joking. What will people think? What happens after such words? On the outside, nothing. The person appears completely normal, they smile, they go to work, they talk with friends who notice nothing, they maintain small talk. But inside something is slowly dying. Emotional abuse is the systematic use of words, looks, gestures, and behaviors aimed at undermining another person's self-esteem, controlling them, and keeping them in a constant state of tension and fear. We don't always recognize it because it rarely comes in the form of obvious aggression. More often, it masquerades as, "I care about you. This is for your own good. I just want you to be better." Forms of emotional abuse. Gaslighting, making someone doubt their own perception of reality. Devaluation, constant criticism, humiliation, mockery. Isolation, separation from friends, family, support systems. Control, dictating conditions in all areas of life. Unpredictability, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. Projection, accusing others of what the abuser is doing themselves. But he, she never hit me, the victim will say. And therein lies the insidiousness of emotional abuse. It's invisible, you can't photograph it, it's difficult to prove. But the scars it leaves can be deeper than physical wounds. The biology of trauma. French philosopher Michel Foucault spoke about the microphysics of power, how power operates not only through state institutions, but through our everyday interactions. Emotional abuse is precisely this microphysics of power in action. It's not just isolated unpleasant incidents. It's a system of power that gradually subordinates, subjugates, changes the very structure of personality. What happens when a person constantly hears that they are worthless? Their brain begins to believe it. Neural connections are rewired. This isn't just psychology, it's biology. Our brain is formed through experience, and traumatic experience changes it physically. Philosopher Martin Heidegger talked about being in the world, how our existence is inextricably linked with our perception of the world and ourselves in it. When you're told every day that the world is dangerous, that you are weak, that you are worthless, your being in the world becomes deformed. You become a prisoner of your own fear. Do you know what happens to an animal that constantly receives electric shocks with no possibility of escape? It falls into a state of learned helplessness. Even when the cage is opened, it doesn't run away. It no longer believes it can be saved. Humans aren't as different from animals as we'd like to think. In a state of chronic emotional abuse, we too fall into learned helplessness. We stop seeing a way out. The cage becomes our home. Now imagine a child growing up in such an atmosphere, a child for whom emotional abuse is the norm, the air they breathe. Their brain forms under conditions of constant stress. Their ideas about love, relationships, their own value become distorted. As Alice Miller, a noted psychologist, said, "A child cannot not love their parents." And when these parents are a source of pain, the only way for a child to preserve their psyche is to believe that they themselves are the cause of this pain, that they deserve it. And this belief becomes the foundation of their identity, their prison, their inner tyrant, who continues to abuse them long after the external tyrant has disappeared from their life. Everyday abuse. Let's see how emotional abuse works in real life. Not in extreme situations, but in ordinary, everyday ones. Jennifer spends 2 hours getting ready for work every morning, not because she wants to, but because her husband Mike criticizes her appearance no matter what. "You look like a scarecrow in that. Do you seriously think that suits you? People will laugh." So she tries dozens of clothing combinations, applies and reapplies makeup, afraid to take a step without his approval. He never raised a hand to her, but he destroyed her ability to trust her own judgment. Jason works at a prestigious tech company in Silicon Valley. His boss, Eric, is a programming genius and a terrible person. He never yells. He simply creates an atmosphere of constant humiliation. Even an intern could have done this. And how many days did you waste on this primitive task? I thought we hired a professional. Jason works nights. He constantly feels inadequate. He checks his code dozens of times before submitting it and still expects criticism. His stomach tightens when he sees a message from Eric. This isn't just stress. It's trauma that repeats day after day. Amy grew up in a normal family in suburban America. No one drank, fought, or argued. But when she got a B, her mother looked at her with such disappointment that Amy felt like a criminal. "We invest so much in you, and you..." This unfinished phrase haunts her to this day. She's successful, she has a great career, but inside, there's always a feeling that she doesn't meet expectations, that she's letting someone down by the very fact of her existence. Remember the fairy tale of Cinderella? Do you know that the stepmother is a classic example of an emotional abuser? You're dirty, you're worthless, you don't deserve happiness, no one will love you. But at least children's fairy tales give us hope that a prince will come and save us. Real life is different. From emotional abuse, you can only save yourself. How abuse destroys self-esteem. To understand the mechanism of emotional abuse, we need to understand how our self-esteem is formed. It consists of 3 components: our own experience of success and failure, comparing ourselves to others, how significant people in our lives evaluate us. Emotional abuse strikes at all 3 components simultaneously. It diminishes your successes. Yes, you got a promotion, but only because your boss didn't see better candidates. It uses unfair comparison. Look at Dave, he's younger than you and already has his own house and a Tesla. And most importantly, it makes you understand that you are not worthy of love and respect. Who else but me would tolerate your antics? Our brains are governed by 3 primal fears: fear of death, fear of expulsion from the tribe, fear of humiliation before the tribe. Emotional abuse exploits the last 2. It constantly suggests that you are not worthy of being part of the tribe, that you will be expelled if you don't submit, that you will be publicly humiliated. And the brain reacts to these threats just as it would to physical danger, with stress, anxiety, readiness to do anything to stay safe. When we are in chronic stress, our brain produces excessive amounts of cortisol. This is a hormone that prepares us for the fight or flight response. But in a situation of emotional abuse, we can neither fight nor flee. We freeze. And cortisol continues to accumulate in our body, disrupting all systems, from immune to cardiovascular. Our brain is literally poisoning our body. Meanwhile, our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning, analysis, works worse and worse. We become less able to think rationally, make balanced decisions, plan our future. We become perfect victims. The cycle of abuse. The most frightening thing about emotional abuse is that it's cyclical. It works according to certain patterns that repeat over and over, drawing the victim deeper. Tension-building phase. The abuser becomes increasingly critical, irritated, controlling. Explosion. Criticism turns into humiliation, threats, blackmail, silent aggression. Honeymoon. Phase. The abuser apologizes, gives gifts, promises to change. Calm. a period of relative peace that gives the victim hope that everything has improved. And then it all starts again. Over time, the cycles become shorter, the honeymoon phase shrinks, tension builds faster, explosions become more cruel. Why do people stay in such relationships? This is a question often asked, and it shows a misunderstanding of the very nature of emotional abuse. Imagine being slowly lowered into boiling water. Not immediately into boiling water, you'd jump out, but slowly heating the water while you're in it. At first it's warm, then hot, then unbearable. But you've already adapted, you've already adjusted, you think that's how it should be. That's how emotional abuse works. It starts small, with mild criticism, with jokes at your expense, with small boundary violations. And gradually, step by step, it normalizes. It becomes your new reality. And there's another reason why people stay. It's called traumatic bonding. Neurobiologist Stephen Porges developed the polyvagal theory, which explains how our nervous system responds to threats. When we can neither fight nor flee, we freeze. And one of the survival mechanisms in such a state is creating a bond with the source of threat. Sounds illogical? But it's deeply biological. A child who cannot escape from cruel parents bonds with them to survive. A hostage bonds with a terrorist, and a victim of emotional abuse bonds with the abuser. This phenomenon is called Stockholm Syndrome, but it's not a syndrome, it's a survival strategy. Red flags: recognizing emotional abuse. How to recognize emotional abuse. Here are some red flags. Constant criticism. You never do anything right. You're always a problem. Gaslighting. I didn't say that. That's not how it happened. You're making it all up. Control. Checking your phone. Controlling finances. Isolating you from friends and family. Humiliation. Insults, mockery, especially public. Emotional blackmail. If you love me, you'll do this. See what you made me do. Unpredictability. Sudden mood changes that you constantly fear. Pathological jealousy. Constant accusations of infidelity without grounds. Devaluing feelings. Don't be so dramatic. You're too sensitive. But the main signal is how you feel in this relationship. Do you constantly feel anxiety? Do you walk on eggshells, afraid of causing displeasure? Do you stop trusting yourself, your perception, your feelings? Do you feel something is wrong but can't clearly articulate it? These aren't just complicated relationships. It's not passionate love. It's not everyone has this. It's abuse. And it's important to understand. Emotional abuse is not just about romantic relationships. It can be a father or mother, a boss, a colleague, a friend, a religious leader, a teacher. Anyone who has emotional power over you. And even more important to understand, emotional abuse often precedes physical abuse. It's the first step toward escalation. Recognizing it early means protecting not just your psyche, but often your life. The path to healing. If you recognize yourself in the described situations, either as a victim or perhaps as an abuser, what next? What is the path to healing? The first step is awareness, calling things by their names, acknowledging that what is happening is abuse. Not a difficult character, not "that's just how it is," but abuse. The second step is safety. If you're in immediate danger, the priority is to find a safe place. There are hotlines, shelters, support services. In the United States, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 888-788. The third step is support. Emotional abuse isolates. It makes you believe that you're alone, that no one will understand you, that there is no help. This is not true. There are psychologists, support groups, friends who may not fully understand, but are ready to listen and be there. The fourth step is therapy. Emotional abuse leaves deep wounds. It changes our nervous system, our beliefs, our behavior patterns. These changes don't disappear on their own. They need to be healed intentionally. Approaches to trauma therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. somatic therapy, internal family systems therapy, group therapy. And the fifth step is reframing, finding a new narrative, a new story of your life, where you're not just a victim of circumstances, but a person who has gone through trials and emerged stronger. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived a concentration camp, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Healing from emotional abuse is not just returning to a normal state, it's a transformation. It's a deep rethinking of oneself, one's boundaries, one's capacity for love and trust. It's a path that begins with pain, but doesn't end with it. Practical techniques for healing. Let's talk about specific techniques that help break patterns of emotional abuse and begin healing. The witness technique. When you feel that you're being devalued or manipulated, try to look at the situation through the eyes of an outside observer. What would they see? Would they consider this normal? This technique helps to step out of the normalization of abuse. Setting boundaries. Start small. I don't want to discuss this topic. I don't like when you talk to me in that tone. I need time alone. Practice these phrases in front of a mirror if needed. Breathing practices. When we're stressed, our breathing becomes shallow, which increases anxiety even more. The practice of deep breathing, 4, 4, 4, 4. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, activates the parasympathetic nervous system and helps calm down. The grounding technique. When you feel yourself being pulled into an emotional vortex, focus on your physical sensations. 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you taste, 1 thing you smell. This brings you back to the present moment. Observation journal. Record situations when you feel devalued or manipulated. This helps overcome gaslighting and see patterns. Self-compassion practice. When a critical inner voice attacks you, try asking yourself, "What would I say to a good friend in this situation?" And say these words to yourself. Kintsugi, the art of golden repair. Japanese practice of kintsugi is the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden, but emphasized, making them part of the new beauty of the object. Healing from emotional abuse is like kintsugi. You don't return to the state before. You become someone new, someone who carries their scars as signs of strength, not weakness. The roots of abuse. To truly overcome the effects of emotional abuse, it's important to understand its roots, both in individual psyche and in society. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas talked about the ethics of the face of the other, about how meeting another person demands ethical responsibility from us. Emotional abuse is a refusal to see the face of the other, a refusal to recognize their subjectivity, their right to autonomy. Psychologist Erich Fromm distinguished between 2 types of love: symbiotic, where one absorbs the other, and mature, where 2 remain separate individuals but create something new in their union. Emotional abuse always gravitates toward symbiosis, toward absorption, toward control. Understanding this helps us see the bigger picture. Emotional abuse is not just toxic relationships. It's an entire system of relations with the world, with others, with oneself. A system rooted in fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being insignificant, fear of being vulnerable. And the paradox is that both the victim and the abuser often share these fears, but they react to them differently. One, with control and domination. The other, with submission and disappearance. Understanding this doesn't justify the abuser, but it provides a key to transformation: the social dimension. Emotional abuse is not just an interpersonal problem. It's also a societal problem. It's rooted in our cultural narratives, in economic structures, in gender roles. Societal roots of violence. Patriarchal structures that normalize domination and control. Economic inequality that creates dependency. Media that romanticize toxic relationships. Educational system that doesn't teach emotional literacy. Religious dogmas that can justify subordination. Feminist writer Bell Hooks wrote about the culture of domination, how our society is structured around hierarchies of power that permeate all aspects of our lives, from intimate relationships to political systems. To truly overcome emotional abuse, we must change these structures, create new narratives, teach children about emotional boundaries just as we teach them to cross the road, as a survival skill. We're used to thinking about violence as something that happens there, to others, in troubled families. But the truth is that emotional abuse permeates the entire society. It's present in schools, in offices, in religious communities, in social media. It has become part of how we communicate, how we see the world. And changing this is our shared responsibility. Post-traumatic growth. Psychologist Richard Tedeschi developed the concept of post-traumatic growth, the idea that trauma can become not only a source of suffering, but also a catalyst for profound positive changes. Research shows that people who have experienced trauma often report discovery of new possibilities, greater value of interpersonal relationships, sense of personal strength, spiritual changes, greater appreciation for life. This doesn't mean trauma is necessary for growth. It doesn't justify abuse. It's merely a recognition that the human spirit has an incredible capacity for healing and transformation. When Sarah ended her relationship with her emotionally abusive partner, she felt devastated. It seemed that a part of her had simply disappeared. Years of gaslighting left her uncertain about her own perception, her own decisions, her own worth. But then she began to discover something new. She began to recognize her true desires, not those imposed on her, but her own. She began to hear her inner voice that had been drowned out by years of criticism and devaluation. "I began to understand that I'm not just a victim of circumstances," she says. "I'm an active participant in my healing, and this healing is my gift to myself." Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." But that's not quite accurate. What doesn't kill us can break us, can leave deep scars, but it can also become a source of deeper understanding of oneself, greater empathy for others, stronger commitment to justice. The choice is always ours. Conclusion: from invisible scars to visible strength. Emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises that can be photographed. It doesn't leave fractures that can be seen on an X-ray, but it leaves invisible cracks in self-esteem, in the psyche, in the soul. These cracks may seem fatal. They may seem like signs that we are broken, beyond repair, doomed to suffering. But what if we look at these cracks differently? Remember kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Japanese masters don't hide cracks. They emphasize them. They make them part of the new beauty. Our traumas, our scars, our cracks, they're not just signs of pain. They're signs of our survival, our strength, our ability to walk through fire and emerge from it, not unscathed, but whole. This path isn't easy. It's not linear. There will be days when it seems you've returned to the beginning, days when old patterns seem insurmountable, days when the voice of the abuser in your head is louder than your own. But every step you take toward healing, every boundary you establish, every moment of self-compassion you give yourself is a victory. Not just over the one who hurt you, but over the fear, shame, and doubts they planted in you. Perhaps you're reading this thinking, "This isn't about me. My relationships, my family, my job isn't like that." Maybe that's true. Or maybe a part of you has been trying to tell you the truth for a long time, but you're not ready to hear it yet. And that's okay. Healing begins when you're ready. Or perhaps you're thinking, "God, this is exactly about me. What should I do?" And the answer is simple. Start small. Find one person you trust and tell them your story. Find a therapist. Read a book about emotional abuse. Take the first step. Invisible scars remain invisible until we start talking about them. Until we start seeing them, in ourselves and in others. Until we start calling things by their names. And when we do this, we don't just heal ourselves, we change the world. We create a space where more people can be safe, be vulnerable, be themselves. We create a world where emotional abuse is no longer considered the norm. A world where invisible scars become visible, not as signs of shame, but as signs of strength. Share in the comments one thing you've always wanted to say to the person who hurt you, but never could, or one step you're ready to take today on the path to healing. Your experience can help someone else find the courage to begin their own healing journey.